The Wall Street Journal calls it a quiet exodus. Redfin data reveals a staggering 26.4% collapse in property searches from Canada in May 2025, with cities like Houston seeing a 55% plunge. For decades, they were the financial bedrock of Florida's winter, a predictable, welcome wave of spending and community. But this isn't just an economic shift. It's a political statement unfolding in real time. A multi-billion-dollar relationship is fracturing, not simply over currency fluctuations, but over a perceived hostility that runs deeper than politics. As millions of Canadians reconsider their journey south, what is the true cost when a welcome mat is pulled away? For over half a century, the bond was as reliable as the winter sun. The annual migration of Canadian snowbirds to Florida wasn't just tourism, it was a foundational pillar of the state's economy. They were more than visitors, they were seasonal residents, homeowners, and community members. In 2024 alone, 3.3 million Canadians visited Florida, a figure that dwarfs any other nation. They paid property taxes, filled restaurants during the off-season, and supported a vast ecosystem of local services, from pool cleaners to healthcare clinics. This symbiotic relationship pumped billions into the local economy each year, creating a predictable rhythm of prosperity that communities from the Gold Coast to the Gulf Coast depended on. It was a golden era built on mutual benefit and shared lifestyle. But beneath the surface, the foundation began to crack. Initially, the pressures were economic. An increasingly unfavorable exchange rate meant Canadian dollars didn't stretch as far. Skyrocketing insurance premiums and rising property taxes began to chip away at the financial logic of owning a second home. Yet a more potent, less tangible force was at play: a changing political climate. A feeling of being unwelcome started to permeate conversations in Legion halls and community centers back in Canada. The rhetoric felt more divisive, more pointed. This sentiment wasn't just anecdotal. By February 2025, an Angus Reid survey revealed a startling shift. 48% of Canadians were now actively considering canceling or delaying travel to the U.S. The first tremors of a boycott were being felt, not just in polls, but at the border itself, signaling that the cracks were about to become a chasm. The shift wasn't a singular event, but a steady, relentless drumbeat of political rhetoric that redefined the very nature of being a visitor in the United States. Emerging from a cauldron of nationalist sentiment, the narrative began to paint foreign property owners, particularly seasonal residents, not as economic contributors, but as a drain. The rationale, repeated at rallies and amplified across partisan media, was presented as a defense of the American middle class. The argument was simple and potent. Canadian snowbirds, with their stronger currency and accumulated wealth, were driving up real estate prices in key markets like Florida and Arizona, pushing the dream of homeownership further out of reach for local families. They were accused of economic freeloading, utilizing public infrastructure, roads, and emergency services without paying their fair share in federal income taxes, creating a perceived imbalance. This narrative skillfully merged economic anxiety with a sense of national grievance. Whispers in Washington grew louder about tightening regulations, proposing new federal taxes on foreign-owned residential properties, threatening to end certain tax treaties, and increasing the level of scrutiny and questioning at border crossings for those who owned homes in the U.S. This created a climate of uncertainty and apprehension. State-level politicians in Florida, echoing the national mood, began publicly questioning the long-term benefits of relying on a seasonal foreign population. The message, whether explicitly stated or implicitly understood, was that the era of the open-door welcome was over. The priority was now insulating the American economy and housing market from outside influences. Every fiery speech, every proposed regulation served as another brick in a wall of perceived hostility, a wall built not of concrete, but of policy, rhetoric, and a fundamental reframing of a once celebrated relationship. For the U.S. administration, this was a political victory, a promise kept to a base that felt economically besieged. They were putting Americans first, even if it meant alienating their closest and most integrated neighbor. The long-term economic fallout in places like Florida was seen as a necessary, if unfortunate, casualty in a much larger ideological war. The welcome mat had been ceremoniously pulled away, replaced by a sign that read, "You are no longer our priority." The response in Canada was not one of negotiation, but of deep, personal offense. This wasn't a trade dispute over lumber or dairy. This was perceived as an attack on their character and their long-standing role as respectful neighbors. The message received across the border was that they were viewed as intruders, not guests. This sentiment ignited a grassroots movement that spread with incredible speed through community centers, legion halls, and online forums. The decision to stay home was both economic and emotional. The Wall Street Journal reported a significant trend of Canadian owners in Florida and Arizona beginning to sell their properties en masse. For many, the financial calculation was straightforward. The investment had matured, and it was the perfect time to cash out before any punitive new taxes could be implemented. But for most, it was a decision of dignity. The feeling was, why should we spend our money in a place where we are fundamentally not wanted? This individual sentiment quickly coalesced into a powerful collective action. The Angus Reid poll in February 2025 was the tipping point, putting a number to the national mood. Nearly half of all Canadians were considering a boycott. The impact was immediate and devastatingly clear. Flight data showed a cataclysmic drop of 71 to 76% in air travel from Canada to the U.S. in March compared to the previous year. The highways told the same story, with total border crossings by car and plane plummeting from nearly 5 million to just over 4 million. The economic pain was felt first at the border itself, where duty-free shops reported sales collapsing by as much as 80%, leading to massive staff layoffs. This was a leaderless boycott, a spontaneous and widespread reaction built on a shared sense of betrayal. It was a declaration that the relationship, for them, was always built on more than just sunshine and beaches. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect that they now believed had been unilaterally shattered. This has created a toxic, deeply entrenched stalemate. On one side, the U.S. administration, having stoked the fires of economic nationalism, cannot easily reverse its rhetoric without alienating its political base. To them, admitting the boycott is causing significant economic harm would be to admit their strategy was flawed from the outset. On the other side, millions of Canadians, having made a stand based on principle and dignity, feel they cannot simply return as if nothing happened. To go back now would feel like condoning the very sentiment they are protesting. Both nations are locked in a silent, stubborn standoff across a once friendly border. The economic symbiosis has been severed, replaced by a political impasse where both sides are losing, yet neither sees a clear path to reconciliation without losing face. The flow of people and money has stopped, and in its place, a quiet economic crisis is beginning to unfold on both sides of the divide. For generations of Canadians, the dream of retirement wasn't just financial security, it was a physical place. A condo in Boca Raton, a bungalow in Scottsdale. That dream has been fundamentally altered. The impact in Canada isn't one of overt economic crisis, but a profound and strategic redirection of wealth and identity. The mass sell-off of U.S. properties reported by the Wall Street Journal represents a tidal wave of capital, hundreds of millions of dollars flowing back across the border. This isn't just profit-taking, it's a conscious act of financial decoupling. That money, once earmarked for property taxes in Florida and restaurant tabs in Arizona, is now being reinvested domestically. It's fueling a mini boom in Canada's own resort communities, funding home renovations in Halifax, and being passed down to the next generation. However, this shift carries a tangible cost, felt most acutely at the very edge of the nation. The once bustling duty-free stores that dot the U.S.-Canada border have become ghost towns. These are not multinational corporations. They are often family-owned businesses that are pillars of their local economies. With border traffic plummeting, these stores saw their revenue collapse overnight, down 40%, 50%, and in one catastrophic case, by 80%. This isn't a line on a spreadsheet. It's dozens of cashiers, stalkers, and managers laid off in small towns like Fort Erie and Gananoque, where alternative employment is scarce. The boycott, born from a sense of national pride and protest, has inadvertently inflicted a deep wound on the Canadian communities that are geographically closest to their American neighbors, creating casualties on their own side of the conflict. The cost for Canada is the hollowing out of its border economies and the quiet severing of a lifestyle dream that defined a generation. In Florida, the impact is not a redirection of wealth, but its outright evaporation. The state is facing a silent winter. For decades, the arrival of 3.3 million Canadians was not a bonus. It was the entire business model. Now the bedrock of that model has vanished. The data from Redfin is devastating. A 30% collapse in Canadian property searches for Miami and Orlando is not just a statistic. It is the sound of the phone not ringing in thousands of real estate and rental offices. The 55% drop in Houston and 47% in Chicago shows this is a national vote of no confidence. The core of the crisis, however, lies in the collapse of the local service ecosystem. Every empty Canadian-owned home represents a broken link in a vast economic chain. The property management firm loses its contract. The pool cleaning service has one less stop on its weekly route. The landscapers see their hours cut. The local breakfast diner loses 24 regulars who used to come every Tuesday. The small hardware store sells fewer chlorine tabs, the local clinic sees fewer seasonal patients, and the golf courses have more empty tee times than they can fill. Multiply that effect by tens of thousands of homes across the state, and the result is a slow-motion economic catastrophe. It's a crisis felt most deeply by hourly workers and small business owners who built their livelihoods on the promise of the snowbird's return. The state is losing billions in spending, sales tax, and property tax revenue. The political rhetoric that played so well on a national stage is now delivering a brutal, tangible cost at the local level, proving that when you tell 3 million of your best customers they aren't welcome, they just might believe you. The world's longest undefended border has become a line of silent, costly protest. A relationship that took generations to build now lies fractured by political rhetoric, leaving communities on both sides to quietly pay the price. This stalemate forces a reckoning beyond just dollars and cents. The fundamental question remains: in a deeply integrated North America, how do you rebuild decades of trust once it has been broken? And what is the irreversible cost of turning a neighbor into a stranger? We want to hear your perspective. Like this video, comment with your thoughts below, and subscribe for more in-depth stories that shape our world.